Welcome to the JOMA Preventative Health Podcast, hosted by the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association. We provide you with up-to-date information on health topics geared towards the Orthodox Jewish community. This podcast content is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice or as a substitute for the medical advice of a physician.
Welcome to the Jewish Orthodox Women's Medical Association, or JOMA podcast. I'm your host, Elisa Minkin. I'm a general pediatrician, and I'm really honored and really excited to be here today with Rabbi Doron Lazarus. Can I call you Doron?
Yes, you definitely can.
Thank you. Doron is a leading sleep expert, thought leader, and author of 2 books. Doron is the founder and director of Executive Sleep Consulting, an online sleep practice specializing in digging deep to find solutions for hard-to-treat sleep issues. He's also dedicated to his community in South Bend, Indiana, where he serves as the spiritual leader for the Midwest Torah Center and has experience in education on every level. He is the proud author of 2 books, one on Jewish medical ethics, Sources Revealed, and on Jewish mindfulness, Don't Mind If I Do. That's a great title, where he explores the intersection of faith, science, spirituality, and psychology. He is a rapid transformation hypnotherapist. I don't know what that is, and I hope we get to that, and outdoor enthusiast. He is a native of San Diego, where he grew up as the child of 2 medical professionals. After gaining his BSc from UCLA in psychobiology, his view of health and medicine was thrown a curveball when he struggled with his own insomnia and was desperately seeking help for this condition. It was only when he realized that his solution lay within, and he embarked on the next 15 years researching sleep, psychology, and the power of the human mind. He cured his own insomnia and now helps people around the world do the same. He gives talks around the country and is interviewed on magazines and podcasts many times throughout the year. So this is awesome. I love your multi-faceted background. I actually majored in behavioral biology in college, so we overlap there.
Amazing.
Yeah. So sleep is really important. I always say there's like the triumvirate of health: sleep, diet, and exercise. And so we already have a talk. I didn't do it. My colleague, who's also a pediatrician, Jenny Berkovich, interviewed a sleep specialist for children. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm more familiar with, the self-soothing in children, small children, and the teenagers that, stay up all night on their phones. But we need to branch out to grown-ups, I think.
Right. Absolutely. Their parents need to be well rested as well.
Yes. And teenagers too. You do teenagers as well, right? You don't do children.
I do kids like starting at maybe 7 or 8 and up.
Really?
So I don't do babies and I don't do toddlers, but when they get a little bit older, I do work with them.
Interesting. So I want to talk about why sleep is important, but even before that, I want you to tell me what is a sleep coach and how it differs from other specialists in the sleep field.
That is a great question. I love that question very much. So sleep coaching means a lot of different things to a lot of people. So I'm not going to define what it means in the world. Some people are, kind of infant sleep coaches and they'll, help your baby sleep. Some sleep coaches are kind of focused on very much one approach in sleep, treating, usually insomnia is where sleep coaches come in. I've really kind of taken my background in sleep coaching and really tried to broaden my experience to really help a variety of sleep issues. So I'm working most predominantly on the behavioral and cognitive side of sleep, whether it's people that are just, having life, stress, anxiety, tension, and that's preventing them sleeping, whether it's specifically what I find very often is that the anxiety around sleep itself kind of morphs into its own beast, working on that. Sometimes we're doing more deeper cognitive work. Sometimes it's going back, to really figuring out where they're in this schism in their life and they're out of sync and out of harmony. Sometimes it's involved in kind of dabbling in marriage and business coaching because those elements of their life are preventing them from sleeping well. So, and also we deal with, sometimes more biochemical issues as well as apnea and snoring. So my kind of base of sleep coaching, it's fun. I really enjoy it. I get to work with a lot of different people. I never know exactly what I'm gonna have on any given day. But I really try to use it as sleep as the foundation for our physical and mental health, really getting everything on board to allow people to sleep their best.
Which is amazing. And I haven't heard of anybody quite as, diverse an approach as yours. Who else is out there though doing sleep? I mean, we mentioned a pulmonologist, right? A sleep specialist.
Right. So it's a great question that I get a lot because, if someone, God forbid, breaks their hand, they know who to go to. You're not like, I'm not going to a homeopath if I break my hand. No insult to homeopaths, but, you go to the ER, you'll go to a bone doctor, whatever needs to be done, and they'll reset the cast. But when it comes to sleep, really the question is, why aren't you sleeping? And depending on that question, you'd really have to understand where you want to go. A lot of people, what the typical route is they'll go to their GP. And this is really where I see things either do well or break down. Unfortunately, a lot of GPs are not well trained to understand complex sleep issues.
Right.
So the number one mistake I say is, oh, you can't sleep? Here's Trazodone, here's Ambien, here's Lunesta. Even though they realize it's not a great fix, GPs want to help. They do want to help people, and if they're not set up, they're there for 15 minutes, they have a line of patients, this is what I have, so, here's this medication, and oftentimes people come to me after that medication has started. Now they say, well, I don't want to be on medication, I'm having negative side effects of medication, it's not working anymore, I want a natural solution.
Right, or I don't want medication from the get-go.
Or from the get-go, yeah, right. Certainly I get that a lot. From there, let's say the GP says, well, maybe I will or won't give you medication, but let me send you somewhere else. So depending on the GP and depending on, how sensitive they are to the topic and how much they can, kind of have time to feel that out, maybe they'll send them to a generalized therapist because they figure, maybe they're just depressed, maybe they're struggling with generalized anxiety, and they'll send them to a generalized therapist. They might send them to a sleep clinic, which itself has, mixed results depending on what kind of case they're dealing with. They might send them to more of a psychologist that's trained in insomnia. So typically, looking at cognitive behavioral therapy, depending on what that issue is. But that's usually where people will kind of first branch out in their explanation to be able to sleep.
Right. When you say sleep clinic, who are the professionals? Is it like a multidisciplinary clinic?
Yeah, usually, most, so to say, sleep clinics around the country depend, they're really kind of divided. There's the sleep lab side of things. Generally when they're looking for things like apnea, that's usually where, the gold standard is going into a sleep lab. They have, very high, expensive diagnostic equipment, and they'll sit you down, and they'll have techs coming in and adjusting CPAP machines if they do detect apnea. So, that's usually overseen by a sleep specialist, which, might be a subspecialty of pulmonology or sometimes neurology, depending on which way they're taking it. And then they have techs that are usually running that show. And then on the side of that, usually the sleep clinic themselves will have, quote unquote, psychologists or therapists of that respect, that if they realize it's not a apnea issue, it's not narcolepsy, it's not anything inherent biochemical, it's more behavioral, which I believe that most sleep issues are, then they'll usually have some kind of, hopefully, some kind of more therapeutic option to be able to deal with that.
So do you have cases where the doctor put the patient on a sleep medication without looking into sleep apnea, and then you say, hey, you might have sleep apnea?
I've seen all sorts of crazy things happen from the medical world. Oftentimes, people will have generalized symptoms. So let's say they come to me or they come to anybody and they say, I'm feeling very exhausted during the day. So that could be 100 things. And obviously, in the medical world, there's a protocol of, testing for certain deficiencies or diseases, God forbid. But if it doesn't kind of come out anything acute, if the blood work comes out normal, there's no clear, indication of any, negative pathology or anything. So at that point, the question is why? The doctor might send them to a sleep clinic. Right? But let's say they say, look, I feel like I'm, my sleep is fractured. I'm kind of waking up a few times, throughout the night. I feel exhausted in the morning. The doc might think, again, depending on his experience and his sensitivity, he might think, well, let me give you a sleeping pill. That'll help you sleep better. But and I have seen this before, if the issue is really apnea, he's actually making the problem now worse. Right. He's actually just ignoring the root cause of it. There's a new book put out. I believe it's called The 8-Hour Myth. I will double confirm that, where there's a medical professional that specializes in apnea, and he describes that getting 8 hours is not the magic solution to your sleep problems. It's a question about the quality of your sleep. And therefore, yes, I have seen that people on sleep medication, when really they didn't have insomnia, they didn't need sleep medication, they really had apnea, and, they just nobody was sensitive to kind of pick that up. And that's, where we try to do that.
Right. So when you suspect undiagnosed apnea, and I'm just going to put in a plug for the doctor to see the doctor first so that you don't miss that. And maybe if you could talk a little bit more about apnea later, it'll be, help awareness for people who don't know why they would suspect they might be having apnea. Do you refer to a sleep specialist?
Yeah, so in general, when someone comes to me, most people that come to me have already seen a whole slew of doctors, but usually my first protocol, if they haven't, is I ask them to get checked out. I realize, and that's a very healthy boundary, I am not a licensed medical doctor.
Right.
I work in collaboration with a lot of, healthcare professionals, but it's very good for them, to have a connection with their doctor, get checked out, making sure there's nothing, kind of more linear that Western medicine is really good at picking up and treating, going on there. And then, come and talk to me. So most people, when it comes to apnea, there's really, let's say someone says, I don't know, do I have apnea or not? I essentially explain to them that there's two ways of going about things. The gold standard, like I said, is going into a sleep clinic, it's going into a sleep lab, it's getting tested. And then you really have to understand from there what your options are. So if you have moderate or severe sleep apnea, they're probably in the sleep lab going to recommend a CPAP machine, right? That is, the gold standard machine that you wear.
Wait, I just want to go back for just a minute. And why would someone suspect that they have sleep apnea? What would that look to someone before we get to what we do about it?
80% of the sleep apnea cases in the United States and around the world are undiagnosed. Now, sleep apnea is actually more prevalent in countries like the United States and other Western countries where we also have an obesity problem. Right. Too much food leads to obesity, which is a pandemic within itself in this country and in most of the Western world. So that exacerbates the apnea. Usually, if people they're either waking up frequently during the night, or they're snoring, which is oftentimes snoring and apnea go together, or they're exhausted during the day, usually, or they say, my wife tells me I feel like she hears me gasping in the middle of the night.
Right.
Like those are all pretty strong indicators that, there's apnea. So let's say, there are obviously risk factors. If a 65-year-old overweight male comes to me and says, my wife tells me I snore and I feel exhausted all day, all of the arrows, point towards apnea versus, if an 18-year-old slim female tells me she feels exhausted, although it might be apnea, chances are not, it's usually there's a lot of the risk factors involved. So I recommend that people, really become proactive. Apnea is, it's definitely treatable in a lot of ways, and left untreated, it can wreak havoc on our health system. It's linked to all sorts of things, including, and this is a tricky one, it's actually linked to obesity. Because, as you mentioned in kind of this triangle of health, weight, and eating and sleep, those two things are inextricably linked. When we're sleeping poorly, we're not metabolizing properly, our whole body, the whole system is thrown off, we're gaining weight, and then the more we gain, the more apnea we have, and then it's like that, that vicious cycle. So yes, it's definitely something really I recommend that if people even minorly suspect that they might have apnea, I definitely recommend looking into it.
Do you also recommend nutritionists? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've worked in the past with a lot of different people trying to bring them into my practice. Nutrition is something that the simple answer is yes. There are some nutritionists that I do refer out to, but I've also somewhat brought the weight loss part of the program under my wing because, how should I say this? I think out of the box of a lot of people, and I find that when it comes to weight loss, there's a lot of things that I disagree with that go on in the world. I believe weight loss ultimately starts with the mind. People don't eat with their mouth or their stomach. They eat with their mind. And you have to be able to apply that mental game first. And I think the reason that a lot of people struggle with weight and they struggle with these, kind of yo-yo diets of losing 30, 40 pounds and then gaining it back and losing it and gaining it back. And, there's obviously a multi-billion dollar industry in all of this.
Which doesn't work,
It doesn't work because you're starving yourself. And the body's most essential core function is to survive. And when it feels like you're putting it into starvation, it will always win. It will always fight back. It's designed to survive. It does not want to lose anything, right? So I've seen in my experience weight loss been mismanaged in a lot of ways. I don't believe in, I believe in a customized diet. I don't believe there's a one size fits all solution. And I'm also not into ultra processed foods.
Right.
A lot of these diets come, take this milkshake and this protein bar and this thing in a can that you can't recognize.
Right.
You're only eating 1,200 calories a day, so you're going to lose weight. But that, first of all, it's not sustainable.
Right.
Second of all, it's simply not healthy. That's not the way our bodies were designed to use food as fuel, and the more natural and the less processed, the better. That's what your body needs. Your body does not need some soy lecithin, thing filled with palm oil and this and that. I'm like, this is not food, So I'm a big believer in, first of all, starting with the mind. I use hypnotherapy as a method to begin the weight loss process, because that's really where it starts. If you don't get the mind on board, if that's always a mental struggle, you'll never be able to lose weight successfully. And then to be able to work with people in a sustainable, in a holistic, in a natural way, that they're the drivers in the seat. As with everything, I tell with all my clients, I'm trusting your intuition. I want to collaborate with you. I want to work with you to make this realistic. And so as opposed to coming of, this is your diet, if you don't do this, you're not going to lose weight, I have to understand what's your personality, what's your lifestyle, what's your challenges, what's going on at home, what's going on at work, and this and that, and put all that together. So I do sometimes, refer out, but I've also kind of developed that as part of my program as well.
Amazing. That is really amazing. Oh, I did want to find out about that rapid hypnotherapy. So since you mentioned it, what is rapid transformation hypnotherapy?
Right. So there is I really became interested in hypnotherapy because I was, certainly trained in the more kind of classic conventional approaches in psychology, and I've studied cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy and a lot of the classic modalities that are out there. But I kind of felt, and this was, just in my research and dealing with clients of different experiences, I felt that a lot of what's going on in the world of psychology is really teaching more coping mechanisms. It's really there that you have this anxiety or you have this depression or you have these negative thoughts or negative emotions, and we're going to teach you to kind of neutralize them, to kind of process them differently, to be able to diffuse them or challenge them or whatever the methodology is. And I felt that you were always kind of playing defense. And I said, I felt in my mind, what would be if we could really go in and help people rewrite those messages, rewrite that subconscious mind, rewrite that narrative. And when I started off just learning about hypnosis in general. To me, it was super fascinating. And I saw it, work on myself. I saw it work in my own practice. I was just so interested to see how it worked. And then as I was, kind of developing my skills in that, I found a British psychotherapist by the name of Marissa Peer. She developed a program called Rapid Transformation Therapy. Marissa basically took what was kind of considered generation one hypnosis as well as combining it with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and she combined it to me, which is just this phenomenal psychological modality called Rapid Transformation Therapy, which is based in hypnosis, but it's also very much there to not only discover what's going on in the mind, but to be able to have the tools to be able for the mind to be able to heal within itself. So it's a broad modality. It can be used for a lot of different things. A lot of what it's used for is psychosomatic diseases and issues. So weight loss is definitely a big one of them. Smoking, addiction, those kind of things. She does, and I personally don't specialize in this, but she has a whole subspecialty in infertility, which, you could go on as your books.
So
There's
interesting.
Thousands of babies that have been born out of her system because in her experience, obviously if there are clear medical issues, there are clear medical issues and these need to take care of an infertility issue. But a lot of issues that will hold on in our body is really issues that are coming from our subconscious mind.
Okay, I'm going to insert a trigger warning retroactively for that comment, okay? Only because I know that for people who struggle with infertility, you know, a lot of times they're told, oh, it's in your mind. And if you know, I'm not saying that this works. I just want to insert a retroactive trigger warning because, you know, that's 100%. A hard struggle. That's a hard struggle to go through. And I'm also going to insert a caveat right up front for a lot of what we're talking about. You know, I think that we're at the frontier of this mind-body medicine. It's not Western medicine necessarily. Western medicine has certain strengths. Evidence-based medicine has certain strengths. It's more, it works better with the disease model as opposed to the illness or functional problem model. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of suffering that we need to get help for. So I'm putting the caveat that not everything we talk about today may be evidence-based. It's, you know, everybody has to do their own research and decide for themselves. But I don't want to be limited to just the evidence-based Western approach because it's not necessarily succeeding in these areas, to be fair.
Right. And I would definitely agree with you in everything that you're saying. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to imply that any of these issues are easy or clear cut. Yeah. You know, I mean, infertility carries a host of both physical and emotional challenges that go with it. I'm only sharing this because, you know, I'm not married to any methodology or any treatment. Mm-hmm. I want to go with what works for patients. I want to help people and help do this. And when you go on Amazon and you look at the reviews of her book that she wrote specifically on infertility, and when you see hundreds, if not thousands of 5-star reviews from people who literally for 10, 20 years were trying everything in the medical world until they tried her approach because their subconscious mind was not allowing their body to conceive. Mm-hmm. To me, that's at least a significant factor to be able to. Is it the only factor? No, I don't mean to say it's the only factor, but I think as medicine is emerging and as healthcare is emerging, I believe in the next 20 or 30 years, there's going to be a breakthrough in recognizing that psychosomatic connection to be able to connect the mind and body and to be able to making sure that both of those sides of medicine are really working in congruence and working in harmony.
Right, but infertility is very complex. And so you don't want to be that person who has tried that and it hasn't worked and they just feel like it's victim blaming. Right. Do you know what I'm saying? Right. So I'm just being difficult.
No, that's fine.
I've had these conversations.
A healthy skepticism is the best way to go. Most of my clients, when they come to me, they have skepticism, and I think skepticism is a great approach. It really kind of teaches us to think critically about the issues and not accept things at face value. And I encourage everyone to really ask these deep questions about their own healthcare and about those choices.
Right. And also, to be completely transparent, you don't take insurance.
Correct.
Right. So again, this is just out there for people. I'm at the other end. I am a pediatrician and I do take insurance, and I've got like 10 minutes to be with my patients. There's no way. There's no way, So what I do is I align myself with various specialists. I have a nutritionist I use, and I don't even think of it as a nutritionist to put my patients on a diet. Diet culture doesn't work. But to help them with healthy habits. I think healthy habits are huge, and there's no way in my 10-minute, 15-minute visit, other than superficially, that I can really have an impact. And everybody's different. I always say, how they say it's not rocket science? It's rocket science, whether it's diet, and it's true for sleep as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely agree. It's an approach that requires a lot of time and requires a lot of, sensitivity and customization. So I value the fact that a lot of healthcare providers recognize, so to say, the more, the more alternative or the more coaching style models to be in partnership with them, and certainly not in contradiction, but understand that we can all best help people by working in tandem. Right.
And I also say, don't let evidence medicine be a prison. Right? Just because we don't know it, works for, a significant population doesn't mean it won't help a specific person, a specific individual. And we're still learning. I mean, we should understand that with COVID, that we're learning as we go. Right. It's true for the mind-body connection as well.
Right. I used to struggle a lot with psoriasis. For about 10 years of my life, I had terrible psoriasis on my hands. And now, again, I'm not giving medical advice or telling anybody, what to do with their own psoriasis. But it wasn't until I kind of, I was going to a lot of kind of more classic dermatologists, very highly trained, accredited dermatologists, and they were trying this treatment and that treatment and that treatment. And maybe it would help a little bit, but it always seemed to bounce back until I met different types of practitioners that were speaking to me about, why is your body in a state of inflammation to begin with?
Right.
And me personally, this was my own personal experience. When I started thinking like that, my skin cleared up, and thank God I have not, been struggling with that ever since. So I think, you're right. Obviously, Western medicine, my father is an internal medicine specialist versus geriatric medicine. And obviously there's a lot of things that is best designed to treat, but people shouldn't feel stuck that that's necessarily the only option if they're not finding the solutions that they're looking for along the model.
Right. And ideally you will work in tandem with your mainstream GP or internist or pediatrician.
Most definitely. Absolutely.
I mean, it's a problem when they, if they don't want to, right? If they just say, oh, that's just nonsense, and they're dismissive, that's, a problem I see in a lot of families who come to me like, oh, you won't really respect this. And I try to listen, and I try to be respectful. And I think that's the way you have a partnership.
Absolutely.
So let's go backwards a little bit and say why sleep is important. And, you alluded a little bit to the different amount of hours of sleep that would be good for people. It's not the same. It's not just 8 hours. Right.
Sleep, as you mentioned, and in my personal experience and experience with my clients, sleep is the foundation of our health. So much of our physical well-being and mental well-being, focus, mood, concentration, drive, all of that comes from sleep. And if anyone's ever struggled with sleep, or we've been up with babies or jet lag or whatever, you get run down, you get sick, you can't concentrate, and you're snappy and all of that. And sleep, it's just, I made a short video recently of what our body does when we sleep, because many people think sleep's just kind of the body just in chill mode, but is it not true? I mean, when you're sleeping, your body's actually in overdrive, resetting your memories, clearing out your neurons, resetting your immune system, allowing growth and, red blood cell production, and all of these things that happen when you sleep. So sleep is really, really valuable. And as I recommend to people, it's an investment. Yeah, it's time, and sometimes you have those real kind of type A personalities that are too busy to sleep, but generally that catches up with them. Sleep is an important investment if you want to be successful, if you want to be healthy, which I'm sure we all do. Sleep is definitely, you get your bang for your buck. In terms of time, so I usually recommend, it's between 6 to 8 hours a night. Some people need more, and some people, need less. In fact, there was an interesting genetic, I don't want to call it abnormality, but a genetic mutation that they discovered at the University of San Francisco, the medical school there, where they actually found that there's it's a rare thing, but people have it, where people double sleep. Essentially that for them, 4 hours of sleep is like what for a normal person is 8 hours of sleep.
Wow.
And so these people thought they had a condition, like, oh my gosh, why am I going to bed at 10 and waking up at 2? I must have insomnia. And in reality, they had this genetic mutation, and for them, that was all the sleep they need. So some people really like that, the CEO is like, great, I can get in the office, 2 in the morning, or the guy can go to the gym, before that. And some people really don't like it. Some people really weirds out. Now, I don't tell people, if they're up at 2 in the morning, I generally think it's a problem.
Right.
But just that people should know, we all have, just as we all have personalities, so too we have sleep personalities, and depending on time of life, certainly I deal, with women at different stages of their development, childbirth, post-menopause, people need different amounts of sleep. And I encourage my clients to be sensitive to their bodies and almost kind of, learn to have that inner awareness. What is my body telling me? Does my body feel run down? Do I feel like I'm dragging around? Do I feel, irritable? Do I need to get more sleep, and how best to do that? Or maybe not. And sometimes oversleeping is also a problem, just as overeating, if you go to the buffet and you have, 10 plates of food, that's not what your body's designed to do. And you're going to wreak havoc on your health because of that. So too oversleeping, and we have to be careful, teenagers are notorious for this, but the teenager sleeps until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and then he feels groggy all day. Well, he feels groggy all day because he overslept. That's just a product of that reality.
Right,
so to be able to find that, go ahead.
Right, but the reason he's oversleeping is because the teen's clock is not set in sync with school. I don't understand why they don't just make school start later for teens. Why can't it start at 11? I don't understand. As a night owl, I don't understand.
I took my kids we had a snow half day on Thursday. So I took my kids at 10:30 in the morning, and they had a shower. They got up when they wanted. They had a nice breakfast. They were all in a better mood, as opposed to rushing them out the house that we do every morning. So yes, I definitely hear that.
We do this to them. I've heard late start as a way of handling this teen sleep, shift. It's a shift in their own cycle. Right. So the reason they're groggy is because they're trying to catch up on lost sleep because they're still staying up late and then they're getting up early when they have to and they're not getting enough sleep. Right. So can you do that? Can you catch up on sleep? Is that okay?
Yes and no. Basically, there's a phenomenal book by William Dement called The Promise of Sleep, and he describes basically the way that sleep debt works. Let's assume, for an average person, we'll take a middle number, let's assume their prime is 7 hours of sleep. That's really, what's good for them. But let's say on average weeknight, they're getting 5 hours of sleep, not 7. So that means every night they're going into sleep debt 2 hours. Now that sleep debt, you can't just say, well, I'll have poor sleep for five days in a row, and then I'll just catch up on the weekend. It doesn't work like that. That, let's say 10 hours of sleep that you acquired in that week can't be made up, and it stays with you for up to 2 weeks after that. So even if, let's say, starting you made a resolution on, January 1st, I'm now going to sleep 7 hours a night. Well, if for another 2 weeks, you still have that sleep debt in your system until you kind of fully sleep that out of your cycle. And then, people who try to kind of binge sleep during the week, or sorry, to cut down their sleep during the week, and then they, binge sleep over the weekend, that's also not healthy because it's just not what our bodies are designed to do. It's much better to try to have consistency. And yes, I myself get a little less sleep on the weekdays and a little more sleep on the weekends, but to be able to have some sort of consistency, because when it's, when you're having a crash sleep during the week and then you're sleeping, 13, 14 hours on the weekend, generally people's bodies, especially post-teenage years, does not respond well to that. It's not optimal, for our health. It's not optimal for our mind. And most people feel groggy and hungover when they do that kind of thing.
Right. And also there are some conditions where having regular sleep really matters, like migraines, which I have. Yeah. So it really matters.
100%. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of conditions that regular sleep really helps us to be able to have the best. And oftentimes people come to me where their sleep cycle gets thrown off and they can't fall asleep. So, textbook definition is to be able to have that consistency to give your body those cues, approximately going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time, can be very helpful for people to realign their sleep cycle and get in touch with that again.
So what are the most common sleep issues? We actually talked a fair amount about apnea, so we'll leave that part out. Mm-hmm. What else do you work with most commonly?
All right. So I would say the most common thing I work with is anxiety-induced insomnia. That's really what I'm seeing day in and day out. Mm-hmm. People will either have a hard time falling asleep, or they can fall asleep fine, but then they're up and then they can't go back to sleep. I definitely see a lot of that. Sometimes we're dealing, with a more kind of generalized exhaustion and then trying to figure that out. Sometimes we're dealing with nightmares and, understanding how that kind of cognitive element, like they're sleeping, but their sleep is very scary and very, disturbing to them. So, it's really, And sometimes it's behavioral. Sometimes I'll get the person who's like, I can sleep fine. I'm just up till 3 a.m. watching YouTube videos every night. And, these things are addictive, and these things are like, it's not just easy to say, well, let's put your phone away. No, these people, there's a real technology addiction out there. And so sometimes we're working on the more behavioral aspect of things just to really enable people to, to be able to give themselves time to sleep. And sometimes, we'll even deal that people have a low, they're almost kind of self-deprecating and like they don't allow their body to kind of relax and recover. They always have to do things for others. They always have to be on alert. There's, a lot that goes into that. So, I see like a wide variety of things, but ultimately it all kind of boils down to, making sure that they're prioritizing their sleep and they're getting that quality and quantity that they need.
And so I'm sure you work on sleep hygiene as well, which we alluded to when we talked about going to sleep and waking up at, reasonably similar hours, ideally on the weekend as well, ideally. You mentioned screen time. How much time would you say you need to get off your screens before going to sleep?
I would say typically it's an hour. Again, different people are sensitive. Many people just fall asleep watching the TV, and like I'm not, although that's not, classically good. It's all about an individualized approach. In my experience, and this is kind of something that separates me from a lot of experts in the sleep world, I don't believe in a lot of hard rules. I find that, oftentimes when you go to kind of the classic cognitive behavioral therapist, CBTI for insomnia, they'll put on a lot of rules. They'll try sleep deprivation, which means they're gonna, kind of cut down your sleep window to a very short amount of time. You have to be doing this by this time. You have to be doing that by the time. Don't stay in bed for more than 20 minutes. Turn off this. It's a very rigid process. And for some people that works. And, I appreciate that process. I learned that process. And for some people I do that. But I find for a lot of people that actually kind of makes the situation worse. Starts putting all this pressure and all this rigidity on a thing that should be very pleasant. I mean, when quote unquote normal people get into bed, there are no rules, there are no laws and hard fast. They get into bed and they fall asleep. And so my approach is more trying to mirror them back to that kind of normal
Interesting.
model.
Make it natural.
Make it natural. So as I tell my clients, I have rules, but all rules are meant to be broken. You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes, classically, if you wake up in the middle of the night, don't look at the clock. Okay, that works for a lot of people, but some people actually causes them anxiety by I just need to know what time it is. If I knew what time it is, that would settle me down. And by taking away the clock, now they're more anxious. And, so everyone, you really have to kind of feel out what makes sense for them, and work with them and work their natural body chemistry and their natural personality to be able to find that solution.
That really makes so much sense. So CBTI, just to go back just a little bit what that is, because I know I looked it up on my medical encyclopedia thing that I use called Up to Date, and they basically said there's sleep medication, you should try to avoid sleep medication, CBTI is the gold standard. So what is it?
Yeah, so CBTI stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia. I know in the medical literature it's considered the gold standard. I wrote an article why I don't consider it the gold standard. And obviously it works for some people. Like I said, with any of this is an individual approach. Right. If CBTI works, then great. I have colleagues that practice CBTI and I respect that, for those clients who I work for. Oftentimes clients come to me. I've just positioned myself in the sleep market. They're CBTI dropouts. And CBTI didn't work for them. And now they're like, well, they told me that was the gold standard. There's no hope for me. There's no hope for me is the worst thing you can do for sleep. Because when there's despair, when there's I've contracted this incurable illness and and no one's able to help me, that'll just shut down your sleep. A lot, so I always believe that there's always a solution and there's always hope. And so classically CBTI, it's usually a 6-week program depending on who's practicing it. And it usually starts off, like I said, so they're usually restricting your time in bed. So they might say, your bedtime's from 11 to 5 and you can't get in bed before, 11 and you can't wake up past 5, 7 days a week. And the goal of that is to kind of train your body. This is the only sleep I'm going to give you. And therefore you're going to learn to sleep then. And then, kind of slowly they open up that window. There's a lot of, you have to have your wind down time at 10 and, you have to be in bed at 11. And if you can't sleep, you have to get out of bed after 20 minutes and try something else, and then go back to bed when you're tired. And, it's a lot of that. And to me, it's focused on that behavioral side. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's very much behavioral heavy. And in terms of the person will say, what do I do with all these, anxious thoughts and, tensions and distress and all that? So classic CBTI will tell you, kind of monitor it, write it down. They're also very big into keeping sleep journals, which I actually don't agree with. But again, I'm just sharing my own perspective. Right. So, they say keep a sleep journal. Exactly. What time did you fall asleep? What time were you up? And to me, that just creates obsession and neurosis, regarding sleep.
It's very structured, and for some people it may be really, really good.
Right.
And I can 100%. See how it's measurable. By the way, one way you can get something to be evidence-based is you can measure it.
Yes. And definitely having that data, and that's obviously why, this is the program that's, that's so to say well understood amongst many circles. Right. And generally in terms of what they do with their thoughts, the cognitive behavioral therapist classically will teach them to challenge those thoughts of their mind tells them, oh yeah, you're never going to sleep again, or what happens if you don't sleep tomorrow, you better fall asleep now or else. And they'll train to well, that doesn't make any sense. I slept fine for 25 years, I know I'm able to sleep, to challenge those thoughts. Again, it works for some people and I respect that for those it worked for. To me, both in terms of the kind of overemphasis on the behavioral side of things, as well as that kind of challenge the thought perspective, to me, that's outdated. And if you take a look, if you understand where the world of psychology is in terms of anxiety and depression, this is just from my speaking to colleagues and understanding the professional feeling, they're actually moving away from what's called cognitive behavioral therapy in its original form, and they're moving towards the acceptance and commitment therapy model, which is, considered kind of the new gold standard in anxiety. And to me, there are some sleep people that are kind of bringing that into the world of insomnia, but it's kind of slow,
What's acceptance and commitment therapy?
Acceptance and commitment therapy is, essentially the model, as opposed to challenging the thought, you become used to diffusing from the thought and accepting the thought and merely kind of changing your reaction to it. Not trying to counter the thought, but be like, okay, the anxious thought is here. I'm going to let it, I'm going to monitor it. I'm going to cope. I'm going to, objectify myself. I'm going to, just to be that more separate, create distance from myself and the thought to be able to gauge that. So like the happiness chap, if you heard of that book, kind of popularized acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's considered the new wave, as they say, of cognitive behavioral therapy. And again, it works for a lot of people. There's a Dr. Meadows who wrote a book called The Sleep School, where he describes this. He basically was one of the first sleep therapists to incorporate acceptance and commitment therapy into insomnia. I believe that's one step better than the CBT model. It's still not my ideal model, but I appreciate what it is, and it does work for some people, and they have an app that, can be very helpful. So, I've seen that emerging, and like I said, both CBT and ACT are good, but to me, they're still at the end of the day coping mechanisms. I want to be proactive. I believe that our subconscious mind gets caught in these negative processes because ultimately our mind wants to help us. Our mind is designed to keep us alive and keep us safe. And that's what it's designed to do. And so it's by having these anxious thoughts, it's not trying to hurt us. It thinks there's a threat, and therefore it's trying to get our attention. It doesn't know that it's not a threat and it's actually keeping us up, but we have to teach our subconscious mind what we do want it to think, as opposed to merely kind of, just coping with these negative thoughts. The subconscious mind wants our instruction. It's waiting for us to tell us, what do you want me to think? I'm just here to help you.
Right.
And that, in my opinion, is where RTT comes in, and using, the power of neurolinguistic programming, giving in bold language and pictures and images and emotions, we have to retrain the subconscious mind that which we want it to believe.
What's RTT?
Rapid transformation therapy, that which we spoke about, that style of hypnotherapy we spoke about.
Oh, the hypnotherapy, the rapid transformation hypnotherapy. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. So that's a lot of different methods. You also, in your website, have another abbreviation, ERP. What's that?
Yeah, exposure and response.
Prevention. Oh.
Right.
Oh, so that's one of those that are used for phobias, correct?
Classically, this is used for OCD. And this is really, we put these terms, we put labels on these terms. But when someone comes to you, these are very amorphous kind of things. Somebody comes to you and they have a hard time sleeping. Well, is that a phobia? Is that an anxiety? Is that tension? Is that fear? Is that, is it an obsessive thought? And the answer is it's kind of a little bit of everything.
Could be everything.
So it's hard to put people in a box. Classically, the classic case of the OCD is person feels like their hands are, covered in germs and they have to wash them, or checking the door, or things
checking
like that.
Checking the clock to see what time it is.
Right. And, what I found for a lot of people that come to me, that, so to say, anxiety, it's not as much an anxiety as it is an obsessive thought, that the thought just kind of keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps coming and keeps triggering. And so, when we're sensitive to it and we speak it out and we realize that's where it's coming from, so at that point, sometimes we'll use, I've developed an exposure program specifically to be able to help the mind restructure that thought, as opposed to always running away from it or trying to diffuse it or trying to challenge it. Sometimes the mind actually needs to take control of that thought, to take ownership of that thought, and then it's simply going to stop chasing us, because the anxiety chases us because it wants to get that attention. That obsessive thought, keeps in this loop, and then people try to, well, no, that's a bad thought. Oh, that's CSSC will go out of my head, and then that just kind of continues this ping pong match in their head, as opposed to the exposure model would say, no, I'm actually going to take ownership of the thought. I'm going to oversaturate myself with the thought. I'm going to become comfortable with this thought to the point that it's no longer going to be keep chasing after me.
It's kind of parallel to the acceptance model. In a way?
It's almost, the acceptance model is neutrality. It's like Sweden during the war, like we're not taking sides,
Okay. You're not fighting it, but you're not accepting.
It's a proactive, okay. I'm taking this negative thought and I'm actively bringing it up. I'm going to make a song about it. I'm going to replay it to myself. I'm going to put a note in my pocket. And, I find, again, different people have succeed at different things, but I find that can actually be very helpful, to really kind of be able to drive that, to recreate that pattern in our minds, that it's no longer a threatening thought that bothers us.
Interesting. So do you have clients that really have greater levels of OCD or anxiety or other mental health concerns that you feel that you should be referring them out? Because you're a sleep coach.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
You do not have certification as any specific therapist. Am I correct?
Besides rapid transformation therapy, but yes.
Okay, rapid transformation. That's specific certification that you have.
Yeah, and that's 100% true. Most clients, I would say most, a lot of clients come to me, they have either worked with other therapists in the past, or they're currently working with other therapists, and I recommend that, I'm always here to collaborate. I recommend that they continue. I work well, with, other styles of therapy. And yes, obviously if a person has, generalized OCD in 10 areas of their life, and sleep is one of them, so I'll definitely help them on sleep. And the great thing about mental health is generally when we conquer or master one area, that will spill over. As I tell most of my clients, if you have anxiety-driven insomnia, well, the tools that I'm going to teach you are going to enhance your life overall. Not only are we hopefully going to cure your sleep issue, but you're going to feel more calm, you're going to feel more in control of your mind, you're going to feel more centered and balanced in all areas of your life, and that's a great benefit. As I tell people, insomnia, in my perspective, is sometimes our greatest teacher. Because, everything's going fine until your sleep breaks down. And sometimes that kind of forces us to take stock of our life, to take stock of our physical and mental health, and really to be able to gain these skills. So that being said, I believe that sleep has a wide-ranging implication of the skills that I'm teaching people do, but you're right. Certainly if someone has, kind of generalized anxiety or generalized OCD, or, if it's trauma or things like that, I don't pretend to be the everything therapist, everybody. Right. And I will recommend that they work with the different type of therapists as well.
Right. And what about the role of medications? And I'm thinking simultaneously about anxiety medications, and also sleep medications.
A lot of clients come to me on both of those. And, the first thing I say, it's part of my policy form. Whenever you're touching medication, it should be done in consultation with the doctor that prescribed it, so that's point number one. Point number two, I personally have not seen sleep medication be necessary in most cases. Because sleep medication is a Band-Aid for most people. Right. It's I don't know why you're not sleeping, but here, this sedative pill is going to knock you out. And to me, it's just indicative that we haven't obviously gone to the root of where the sleep issue is coming from and cured it from the inside. So to me, I've never really seen sleep medication be a great long-term solution. Coupled with the fact that, especially the heavier sleeping pills, the Ambiens, the other benzos and whatnot, they're habit forming, they have negative side effects, they're linked to long-term chronic health issues. So, it's just never a great long-term solution. In terms of, in terms of the more anti-anxiety stuff, which I definitely see a lot. So at that point, we really have to ask the question, are you taking the anti-anxiety medication because you have a sleep issue? And, really, once we would cure that anxiety regarding sleep, so then you wouldn't need that. That's my goal with people. If they tell me, I have to take a, half a milligram of Klonopin, but, to go to bed, which I get a lot, I would say, okay, we're going to work on that, but I want to get you to the point that you're not going to need that medication. I want to wean off that medication completely to the point that you're totally, and thank God, we've done that many, many times with clients. Where, so to say, I do have kind of more of a question mark in my head, and, again, I'm collaborating with a client. If they tell me, look, I'm on an SSRI. I'm on a low dose of SSRI. I tried going off of it 3 times, and when I do, I just feel down. I feel generally anxious. I'm not sleeping well. And, to me, this is kind of part of my life. So I say, look, and there's no obviously kind of trigger of where that anxiety is coming from. I do believe that people, are on a spectrum of serotonin production, and people who are just naturally producing low levels of serotonin, SSRIs can be amazing and can be lifesavers and can be great. They shouldn't feel it's a stigma or a taboo and this and that. And those are great tools that we have our generation to really be able to help them. And I'm not necessarily interested in getting them off that SSRI if, that really helps them and they feel that's a great long-term solution. So I try to kind of find that balance. I'm not anti-medication, but I do kind of question, why do you really need medication? And is it really an essential tool for you? Is it really helpful? Or is it merely just kind of masking over the problem and we really want to try to work off of it?
Right. I mean, there's going to be a spectrum. So there's going to be people at the most extreme end who are taking medication to fall asleep that are anxiolytic, but they're taking it to fall asleep because it makes them sleepy and they don't have an anxiety disorder. And there's going to be a whole spectrum to people who need to be on medication. And I do always have the concern that a more alternative approach may be an anti-medication approach, and there should be no shame in needing to take medication. We don't even have to go down the rabbit hole of, is it truly a serotonin imbalance, or it's just you need it for whatever reason? It doesn't matter. It's something that you need. I've seen too many people who you can tell when they're no longer taking their medication just by having a simple conversation.
Right.
Yeah, so.
And I 100%, I encourage my clients to do that, which is going to be most helpful for them, most helpful for their families. And, sometimes SSRIs are lifesavers and really, can help people lead, tremendously productive lives. So, I'm all about balance and all about finding the right solution for them.
Right. So just like people should be working, together with their healthcare professional, they should also be working with a mental health professional who's able to prescribe medication, because that's not something that you could do.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. Just making it crystal clear.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll even be in the situation that someone comes to me and, this is rare, but it does happen. And I say, look, you have an acute anxiety regarding sleep. I recommend you go to a doctor, you get a week's dose of Klonopin, and, you have it for 3 days to take the edge off this, because I can tell you're so tired now, you're so frustrated now, you don't even have the mental, so to say, drive and wherewithal to work together on these kind of, things that we're working on. I need you to take a break, I need you to, have that, and I find that sometimes when they take the edge off, even knowing that, they're not going to take it past 3 days, but they have that medication, just to be able to kind of find that balance, I have recommended people do that, and, like I said, I do not prescribe medication, I recommend doctors that they go to, but, so again, I'm never anti-medication, but I find that it has to be a tool in our disposal, and knowing obviously how to get off of it and how to, kind of cure the issue.
Right. And medication to fall asleep should really be short term. Even the up-to-date says that quite clearly. It's not meant to be a long-term solution. Okay. So that's really, really very helpful. Okay. One thing we didn't talk about yet is the functional medicine piece that you do. And I'm going to again put my little caveat out there. This is not mainstream medicine, and I'm not here to endorse any particular approach. Please work with your healthcare professional at the same time. But what is your functional medicine piece?
Sure. And that's a great question. And like I said from the beginning, I'm not married to any one style of medicine or healthcare or mental health. I only encourage or, really kind of brought on a functional medicine team onto my practice when I originally opened up, I was always, it's all in your mind, mind over matter. You can conquer everything with your mind until you realize that you can't. And there are, imbalances within our bodies. And so I felt that I would be doing a disservice not to bring this side of healthcare, as an option for people. And I always explain the options. I'm never, kind of pushing anything, but, I really felt that for some people, for a lot of people, if it's not clearly cognitive, let's say I have a client and they say, I don't know why I can't sleep. I'm a very calm person. I have no anxiety regarding sleep. It's been going on for, 20 years, or maybe it's been going on, since the childbirth or since menopause or this and that. I'm cool, calm, and collected. I've had no trauma in my past. I'm slim. I'm doing everything right. And I just, I still can't sleep, or, I have this, kind of issue. I keep waking up in the middle of the night, or I have, hot sweats in the middle of the night. So again, I always recommend that they work with their conventional medicine doctor and, making sure to rule anything else out. out, but I find, when that, and sometimes even within that, I do recommend that, let's explore your subconscious mind just to rule out that there's nothing going on, because I spoke to a lady earlier this week, we spoke about her case. She's like, well, I'm not a stressed and anxious person. And then we started working together. She's like, well, my sister did pass away when I was 9, and I was this child of Holocaust survivors. And, so I haven't even gone to therapy with her. I'm like, you should just think about, perhaps, I'm not saying definitively, perhaps there is a subconscious element that's really, kind of interrupting that. But assuming that we rule out that side of things, where I found that functional medicine can really be very effective is if it's not a black and white issue. There's no classic, black and white case that, there's a disease or a pathology that's causing this. So I found that when functional medicine specialists look at a person, they're really asking the question, why? Why is this person's body not sleeping? How can we go down to the idiosyncrasies and the uniquenesses of their biochemical tapestry to understand and ask the questions, where could that imbalance be? And I found that oftentimes it can be very, very successful at being able to kind of repair and reboot someone's systems. And that's really, I've really had a privilege of working together. Every time that I meet with my team, I learn a lot. I consider myself a student of sleep every day. I'm learning it from my doctors, from my clients, from my peers. And I found that that's going to be a really helpful tool in our disposal to understand, where those things are coming from.
Right. So let's define what functional medicine is, because there's a lot of terms being thrown around, including integrative medicine, which integrates, mainstream and more alternative approaches. Functional is, by definition, a more alternative approach, correct? And it looks for the root causes.
Yes.
Would you say that's correct, of problems? So again, I'm just throwing my caveat out there that this, by definition, is not accepted across the board. It's not a mainstream approach. It's not something that everybody's going to want to do. But as I said earlier, there's so much we don't know. And when you have a problem and you're looking for a solution, especially if it's something that won't hurt and might help, your choice to do it or not.
Right.
So
right. Most definitely.
I think it's interesting.
And it's sometimes you have doctors that move back and forth. I know Dr. Mark Hyman, who's one of the big spokesmen for functional medicine in the country. He's a former MD, and that he was kind of converted over to the side of functional medicine. I believe he has a functional medicine clinic at the Cleveland Clinic. Actually,
yeah, the Cleveland Clinic has a functional medicine clinic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So again, is it for everybody? No,
right.
I don't believe it's for everybody. But I've seen I've seen the approach work well for a lot of people, enough so that when they're not finding solutions in kind of the more classic Western medical system, I found that functional medicine can be very insightful and very refreshing and very, really kind of helping give people hope to be able to how to drive those systems forward.
Great. And it's not a required, piece of what you do. It's something that can be added on or not.
Correct. Yeah, most definitely.
Which is very interesting. So this is a lot of information. I'm sure we could talk a lot more, but it's Erev Shabbos. So I just want to know how people can find you.
Sure. So you can go online. My website is executivesleep.org. Or you can email me at Doron, Doron, at executivesleep.org. And I give a free consultation to anyone who would be interested in speaking. And I'm happy to help the world sleep better. And
there was a great article in Mishpacha magazine about you.
Thank you.
That's how I found out about you.
Hopefully we're having another coming up soon.
Oh, awesome. So I have to thank you so much for doing this with me. I wish you a good Shabbos.
Amen. Thank you so much. A pleasure speaking with you. And
you too.
And best of luck with all of your endeavors.
Thank you. Be well.
All the best.
Thanks for listening to the JOMA Preventative Health Podcast. If you've enjoyed this, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and share this with your friends. For more information, check out our Instagram at JOMA_org. Check out our website, www.joma.org, that's JOWMA.org, or email us at health@joma.org.